I asked ex-Mormons why they left the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and one of the more common answers that I got was the Book of Mormon. Things like it was written in Old English, King James errors perpetuated in the text, Native Americans not having Jewish DNA, the absence of archaeological evidence, and the presence of anachronisms. Which, if you don't know what that means, it's something that's out of place for its time. Be like a cell phone appearing in the Roman period. I'm going to offer extremely brief explanations for these things. I've done whole videos on them in the past. This will just be one that just hovers over them briefly. Then I'm going to explain something maybe even more important. The first thing here is if the Book of Mormon is in fact an ancient text translated from Reformed Egyptian, why is it written in King James style Old English? Well, there's a scripture actually in the Book of Mormon that explains this. It says, God speaks unto men according to their language, unto their understanding. So what this means is if my familiarity with spiritual language was in Arabic, the Book of Mormon probably would have been written in Arabic style. Joseph Smith's familiarity with religion was the King James Version of the Bible. And so his language and his understanding was the King James Version of the Bible. The model of God revealing things to man that makes the most sense to me is that God gives us answers that are conveyed to our spirit, but our brain still has to interpret these. And in order to do that, the human brain has to use things that are already in it. The language that is already there, the ideas that are already there. If the paint that we have to work with is black and white, then it will paint a sunset in black and white. So whatever is conveyed to Joseph Smith's spirit then had to go to his brain, where according to reports, it was kind of a mixture of information coming in through his visual cortex and Broca's area, which would be the language center. Now, I actually do not think the information traveled in through his retinas, through the optic nerve. I think it was conveyed from his spirit to his subconscious mind and then to his visual cortex, a similar pathway that someone would have when dreaming. And what I believe occurs when people have visions. The brain is interpreting something into its visual cortex. But in this case, it was language being interpreted into his visual cortex, which is a complex form of vision in which Joseph Smith would see a vision of something written down on a page. Language itself is fraught with many, many errors, but so is the human brain. And to me, this process would account for it being written in Old English, for the King James translation errors being perpetuated, and maybe even the presence of anachronisms. Although that one might be slightly more complex and also have to do with the people that are writing things. For example, horses. If there were no horses on the American continent, and King Lamoni has some four-legged creatures that are roughly the size of what he seems to have documented a horse being, and nowhere does it ever record anyone ever riding one, which would be consistent with like a llama or something. What is he going to write down? Llama? That's not in his language. He's going to probably write down horse. That's the closest animal that he'd have to relate to a llama, perhaps. Who knows how a Reformed Egyptian works? Or maybe he did write down the correct name. But maybe the name that came to Joseph Smith's brain, because of Joseph Smith's language, his understanding, was horse. And by the way, there actually are the presence of wheels and axles in the Mayan archaeology. They even have toys preserved because they're made out of clay, demonstrating that the Mayans had use of axles and wheels that could easily be used in chariots. And if they have that technology, it'd make a lot of sense that they would use it. The Mayan timeline does relate very closely to the Book of Mormon timeline, although we don't think those were the same cultures, but they're evident that those things were present in that time period. And I do find it interesting to note that nowhere, any place, is anyone ever detailed as riding a horse, which is pretty surprising, because if they had horses, it seems like they'd use them in war and for all kinds of things, but never any place is that seen. The king's got a couple, and he brings them with him. Kind of funny imagining Ammon out feeding the llamas. If I had a scene of Napoleon Dynamite saying, "Eat the food, Tina," I'd put it in here. So other anachronisms like steel and things like this could be the same kinds of thing. Very strong metal. What's the word that comes to Joseph Smith's mind? Steel. I looked over the list of anachronisms, and all of them would make sense in this way. What about the absence of archaeological evidence? Well, this is where we run into some problems. Where are you going to look? Is it North America or South America? Where in North America? Where in South America? 99% of the South American sites haven't even been excavated yet. Plus, it's been like a long time, over 1,000 years, since the last event in the Book of Mormon. That is a lot of time for subsequent nations and cultures to move a lot of things around, for a lot of bones to deteriorate. So when people say, oh, well, where's the archaeological evidence? That's just silly. We don't even know where we'd look for it, much less even expect to find it. And the things that we have found are pretty amazing and point to me to a lot of the things that are discussed in the Book of Mormon. And I don't even expect to find those things, especially after over 1,000 years. What about this last one? This is the big kicker. Where is the Jewish DNA among Native Americans? Let's familiarize ourselves with a little bit of some Book of Mormon chronology. So Nephites and Lamanites get divided. Nephites go up north, Lamanites stay down south. Next time that any Nephites have contact with Lamanites, they're like a different culture, they're a different skin color. I think they're even speaking a different language. And they're super, super numerous. Like outnumber the Nephites 100 to 1, if not more. How did they grow so fast? How did their skin change? How did their culture suddenly shift overnight? Well, there's a couple possible explanations. The Nephites record that they thought some kind of racist ideas, which makes sense. When you're at war with people, people tend to be racist, which is not something I'm saying is good. It's just as psychologically and historically consistent. People that all look a certain way that are trying to kill your family usually don't have very happy thoughts about them. And oftentimes you'll generalize them. And of course, you're going to make lots of assumptions about them. It says that they were marked, distinguished, to look different. Now, the way that I see this occurring most reasonably and naturally, based on my experiences of being on this earth, is they probably intermarried with the native population, which did not have Jewish DNA. And also would explain why suddenly their skin color changed, why suddenly their culture changed, why their language changed, and why suddenly they were so incredibly numerous. So to me, what makes the most sense is that the Lamanites, the southern group, intermarried with the native population. And then they completely wiped out, the northern population that was Jewish. So we have one group that is intermarrying with the indigenous population, which is not Jewish, and then the other group, which did maintain, for the most part, its Jewish DNA that's completely eradicated. So where's the DNA? Well, anyone should be able to explain to you that it only takes about 8 generations for there to be literally no detectable DNA from a certain ancestor. For example, my wife, about 8 generations back, has an African American ancestor. My wife has blue eyes and blonde hair, and genetic studies show no African American DNA. This is because after 8 generations, there's less than 1%. And our DNA tests don't report things that are less than 1%. Interesting to note, though, her dad had sarcoidosis, which is predominantly something that black people have. Of course, it can hit anybody, but I just thought that was interesting. So anyways, although I find very reasonable, logical, and simple explanations that are 1 and 2 step logical reasoning. So any silly person I hear that says mental gymnastics, which people love to do with a little picture of the person doing gymnastics, that's silly. And the fact if you say this is mental gymnastics, this is an insult to your own intelligence. This is like 1 and 2 step basic reasoning. That's very, very simple. No gymnastics necessary, at least nothing I would call gymnastics. Anyway, so for me, it appears to be totally logical. None of the things they point out in any way disprove the Book of Mormon. But let's just say that they did, even though I don't believe that they did. The Book of Mormon has 3 claims: historically accurate, spiritually uplifting, and doctrinally consistent, or accurate, or whatever. Let's say that for whatever reason, I believed all these other claims, which I don't believe, and the Book of Mormon is not historically accurate. It still is spiritually uplifting and doctrinally accurate. Draws me closer to Christ. It uplifts me. It deepens my testimony of Jesus Christ. Worst case scenario, it's still an amazing book for me to read. And I believe that it's true. And I believe that it testifies of Jesus Christ. But even if it was some sort of inspired, imaginative story that came to Joseph Smith's mind, I don't even have a problem with that. Jesus Christ came up with a lot of really cool, inspired stories that encourage people to believe in him too. I don't have a problem with those either. Anyways, you don't have to agree with me, but maybe at least you can understand me a little bit.